All right, so I've had a few requests to talk about my Theatre of the Mind Playspace for Star Wars RPG in Foundry, and so I thought I'd just go over kind of basically how it all works so you can replicate it yourself if you're interested. So I'll give you an overview of how it works in general and then get under the hood and show you kind of the fiddly bits that make it all work. So in a session, this is pretty much everything the players will see. This is where we do all combat, all encounters, all roleplay, everything happens in here. Obviously with the support of the chat for roles, we'll use the encounter manager for combat, all that sort of stuff. But everything they're doing with tokens and stuff all happens on this space. And there's no need for them to go diving anywhere else except maybe into the journals to take notes, all that sort of stuff. So kind of the main feature of this Playspace is the viewports here. And I sort of use this main large one as where they're currently at. I use like a background image to give them an idea of what the place looks like. So in this case, they're in a warehouse. But naturally, I can change this image to whatever I want. So I have this hidden button up here that I can click. And that opens up a file picker that I can then go and just change to whatever I want. So let's go with Windows XP, which is awesome. And then I've also got these three other images that I can replace as needed. So for example, over here, maybe I would want to show someone they're talking to. I don't know, this Trandoshan. And then maybe, I don't know, this one is going to be a vehicle, maybe. Let's go with that one. Why not? So using this, I can kind of show them information that they need, visual information that they need. It doesn't actually scale the image correctly. You can see that this is a little bit squished, but it'd be a lot more obvious if we put him in as the first one. We'll see that he will become extremely wide. And then we have the wide boy, which is fantastic, but probably not the vibe you're necessarily going for. I haven't put much effort into fixing this. It's not really a big problem. I just put images where they, vaguely should go. But it, obviously it would be nice. These kind of no data, kind of fuzzy, static images are sort of what I use as the default. And when we're done looking at whatever, I just go back and choose the correct one. And we can sort of reset back to how most sessions start, is with this look. So this main screen in current location is where I'll represent any actors in combat, stuff like that. So if we replace it with an image again, we'll go back to Windows XP. We can obviously move tokens around in this space to represent their vague positioning. Now I play pretty strictly Theatre of the Mind, but it is helpful from a mechanics point of view to know, Grimbo's over here, and I can say Grimbo is medium range from TI right here, and that's usually fine. Obviously we can have bad guys in here as well. You can see I've made the players bigger, partially to show off the cool art that they've got, but also to make it very clear who's who on screen. Sometimes if they're fighting a nemesis, we'll have a big one for them as well. But we can move them around. Say TI runs in to beat them up. Simple as that. We don't need a map. We can just imagine we're fighting in the lovely fields of, it pretty much looks like Naboo, right? And that's pretty much all we really need for combat. It doesn't need to get much more complicated than that. Sometimes I will draw if they want to get more tactical with it, which does happen sometimes, and I like to facilitate the players. I'll use the drawing tools just to draw out rooms and stuff like that. So for example, we could say maybe TI's in a room here, which has a door, and then these guys are all in another room. Now, would I need to make a map for a scenario this simple? Not really, probably, but it does help sometimes. And it is a little bit hard to see, so I've also included the ability to kind of darken the background so you can see these drawings and stuff a little bit better, which is pretty handy. So the other thing that's really handy for me in particular as a GM is that we have the actors over here, and then I've got these health bars that represent their wounds and their strain. Now, obviously, if you're familiar with Star Wars RPG, you'll know that in fact we should be gaining wounds, not losing health. But I find it's a good visual indicator at a glance where everyone's at, right? Like TI's taken some damage, but he's still good to go. He's used a lot of strain, so he might need to keep an eye on that. And that's really handy for me as a GM. I can see like, okay, well, Zarvik's the sniper. He's still got plenty of strain left in the tank, so he's probably going to be hitting his shots with his talents, with take aim, all that sort of stuff. So it's really, really fantastic for me to be able to just take a glance, not have to open up any character sheets, anything like that. And you can see that if we were to look at Zarvik's, when it's full, he's got 0 wounds. And then obviously as he starts to take wounds, it'll lower his health there. So there's a little bit of an issue with the way it's set up in that if we go down to, or go up to 12, which is his max, you'll see it's 0, which would kind of, you would assume that means he's unconscious or whatever. Technically in Star Wars RPG, he'd obviously need to be at 13 for that. But honestly, if one of the player characters is down that low on health, I'm taking much closer notice of it anyway, so it's not really a big deal. All right, so looking at some other interactive elements around the place, there's some buttons that the players have access to. So these ones over here for the map are all GM specific, but the players do have access to, for example, they can click on their portrait and it will open up their character sheet. It's not actually a token here, but we're using an active tile to do that. Similarly, down here, there's a link to their group character sheet. So this carries, stuff like their ledger of money, any of the equipment they're storing that's not on their ship or whatever, and any group obligation they've got, which is hooked into a macro that I use to roll obligation here. So another one we've got here is the Navi. So this opens up an external link to a interactive Star Wars map. Unfortunately, it's actually dead, which is unfortunate because it's my favorite interactive Star Wars map, so I'm hoping it comes back. But obviously we can just put up any link that we want there and replace it as needed. There's also this jobs button, which will open up, I believe it's Vorian's quest log module. I'll put it in the description, which is where they're tracking certain things that they're doing. I don't use quests as a, they don't have like a quest board they go to or anything like that. It's purely long-term things that they feel like they want to work on long-term, or if they've talked to someone and they've said, hey, I've got a job for you, but they're busy at the moment, I'll put it in here so that they can always have a look and go, okay, what can we look at next if the story isn't propelling them along naturally. And we've also got a link up to their kind of main ship. Pretty straightforward, just opens up this actor. And then if we look up here, we can see their galactic position. So this is really just a drawing that I can edit the text on. So I can change that as they move around the galaxy. In fact, I do need to change this. This is out of date. But this is using advanced drawing tools and custom fonts. This font might be a part of Foundry, I don't remember, but definitely over here, I'm using a custom font for the Aurebesh, right? Which I believe comes with the Star Wars Foundry module. So yeah, obviously I update the galactic position as they move around. Usually I just update it between sessions. It's not really something I keep up with during the session, hence why it is out of date. And then over here in the HoloNet news line headlines, I just put a little bit of flavor text in, something for them to look at when they join the server and are waiting for the session to start. At the moment, they're in corporate space, hence the headlines there. And then the only other thing I guess I can sort of point out in terms of buttons is this map button, which is different to the Navi button in that it opens up a map actually on the scene. Now it's a little bit scuffed. You can see there's tokens on top of it and all that sort of stuff. But it is handy in that we can obviously ping on this one. We do use it every now and then. Honestly, probably better off just using the map scene rather than doing this, but it does do the job. And we just double right click to close it so it doesn't interfere with the pinging. And finally, we have the persons of interest. Now, these are basically just journal links using the pincushion module. So you can click on these and it opens up a journal. Now, players haven't really been interacting with this at all, so not really something that we use, but it exists. It was an idea I had and didn't really pan out, so that's fine. And of course, there's a bunch of empty space here. You could put some text or something if you want to leave some notes. All right, so that's pretty much how I use it during a session. So let's dive into sort of how it works under the hood. So most of what you're seeing here is a custom image that's been built in Affinity Designer, which is basically like Illustrator, that I've designed myself with this kind of imperial theme. So if we jump over to Affinity, you can kind of see what we're working with here. So you can see most of this is just a background. The main difference is that these things are actually transparent in the final export. But you can see it's just one big image, and we just load this up as the background and also the foreground for reasons I will show you later. But yeah, I just designed this from scratch. Obviously, you could go with whatever vibe you want. I went with Imperial just because it's all straight lines and random little nubbly bits that look fine when they're flat like this. I think if you went for a more rebel or like kind of rundown vibe that you see in the original trilogy, it would be a lot harder to design it for. So yeah, I went with the Imperial clean look. And you can see I've kind of themed it as if they were being investigated by the ISB, which is not strictly actually true, but they certainly have throughout the course of the campaign caught their attention. So that's get exported out as one big image. Then each of these are their own images as well, as I showed. So back in Foundry, we can look at the scene. We can go to configure, and you can see that I've loaded this up as a background image and a foreground image. You can see the export looks like this. So this is just one big image, and the only other images I include are the wounds and the strain bars and the kind of fuzz default images I put there. That's kind of the whole thing. So most of what I'm doing is just creating invisible tiles over the existing image that I can change. I guess you could make it editable in Foundry by making each of these buttons their own tile and then just moving the tiles around. I found it a little bit easier to lay things out in Affinity than try and do things in Foundry where you don't have tools like aligning things and all that sort of stuff. So the reason there's a foreground image as well, which does come with the downside that if I was to move a token, we can actually put them underneath the image. The reason for that is twofold, really. So one is these bevels I've put on the corners, which mostly are just there to look good, but also this kind of glow effect, which might be a little bit hard to pick up in the video. There's kind of a glowing effect around that. If I was just to use the background image by removing the foreground image here, you would see that we just get these square images, and you'd have to build a flat border that doesn't go over it. One of my really key things was that I wanted to be able to use just pretty much any image I downloaded off the internet. So obviously I could make it work a little bit cleaner if I made kind of cropped images that had this cut off, right? The bevels cut off and whatever. But that was going to be way too much work kind of day to day. So that's why I'm using the foreground here. It is annoying that we can't move tokens over here, otherwise we'll lose them, but it's really not a big deal, honestly. You could probably build a wall using the mapping tools to stop tokens from leaving this area, but I think it's been an issue once total, so not a big one. So let's look at the active tiles, which is what kind of powers a lot of the functionality here. So these buttons that I can press are all powered by a module called Monk's Active Tiles, in combination with another module called Tagger, which work quite well together. So for a really simple example, we can look at the group one, which I can click and opens up the group. We can go into the tile controls and just double click on it there, and you can see when I hover over it, it shows the actual tile. You can see I'm just using a transparent image here. I don't know if I could just use nothing or whatever, but I've just got an empty one there. And then what Monk's Active Tiles adds is the ability for these triggers. A bunch of different ways you can trigger them. I use click for everything because I'm obviously building a user interface, but it does have a bunch of features about moving tokens into other tiles and all that sort of stuff. But for this one, anyone can click it and it will do the action. So the action in this case is open an actor sheet, and it opens the actor sheet group for the person who clicked it. Pretty straightforward. So Monk's Active Tiles has a bunch of these functions it can run to do certain things, and there's a number of modules that hook into it and open up their own functionality to it, which is really handy. So you can see, obviously, I've done that with the quest log as well, because Foreground's quest log adds functionality into Monk's Active Tiles, which is really nice. So when we get to something like the fade, for example, it gets a little bit more complicated, but not much. These ones are controlled by the GM only, so the players can't interact with them at all if they manage to find them. And this one, basically, what we do is we just switch between two images on a tile, one of them being the darkened, transparent background image. And we use Tagger to tag a specific tile. Now, the reason I've used Tagger as opposed to just selecting that tile specifically is I found if I duplicate the scene, then those references kind of get lost because they're actually technically different tiles. Doesn't seem to happen all the time. I'm not really sure. But using Tagger seemed to fix that problem. So you can see here it just uses the tag tint to find the other tile, which is this one here. If we open that up, you can see that it's got the tint tag. So that's how it manages to find it. And then the images, I believe, are just empty again and then black. And then we use the fade transition to get that fading effect when we click on the button. And it's a little bit scuffed, but oh well. So when it comes to the actions that change these images, we run a macro. So if we have a look at the tile, we can see that on click, it runs a macro. The macro is called change image screen, and it passes in an argument main screen. If we were to look at one of these other ones, you'll see it does the same thing, but we pass in a different argument, right? So we pass in screen 1, screen 2, screen 3. And then in the macro itself, just very, very simple macro, which opens up a file picker. This is just a built-in function in the Foundry API. And then we select an image. And then all we do is we change the tile, and we pick the tile by using the argument we pass in as the tag that we're looking for, right? And then we just update the texture. Very, very straightforward, but get a lot of mileage out of this really simple macro. So looking at the actor display area, we can have a look at these health bars. Now, it's a little bit goofy in that each of these health bars is actually a separate token. So if we was to go into and edit one of these tokens, you would see that, again, I'm using that empty image. And then in the resources, I'm using the Brawl module to be able to do advanced configuration and use an image as the health bar or the resource bar itself, right? And then because it's SWRPG, we're doing an inversion instead of counting up, all that sort of stuff. So that's fairly straightforward. You can just paste in whatever image you want. It is kind of annoying in that, you can obviously move this token and then your health bar goes with it. But not really a big deal. Every now and then a player will move it by accident and whatever. Sometimes we get some weird little status effects on there. Sometimes the players selected it and then, they'll go to say something, and then it will show up that their wounds have said it, but, whatever. Not a big deal. But yeah, that's how we use it session to session. Fairly straightforward. Obviously, it was a decent amount of work to set it up, particularly building out this kind of the graphic to use as the background. But obviously, it, putting this sort of effort into the space that they use every single session, day in, day out, it's kind of like, it's worth it. It makes it feel like it's their campaign and not just a campaign they happen to be in. And I think it's a really kind of unique thing you can provide your players that they're not going to get in most campaigns with, not a huge amount of effort. So I'll probably look into releasing a genericized version of this Playspace for you to use. I'll get rid of the images and all that sort of stuff. In the future, I'm not really sure how I'm going to distribute that, possibly a module or something like that. But I wholeheartedly encourage you to build something like this yourself. And you can just use really simple stuff to really elevate the experience for your players. Yeah, and that's it. So if you've got any questions, let me know on Discord and I'll help you as best I can. And I'll see you later.